Welcome back to Juice's Arthropods. My name is Juice, and happy 4th of July to all the American friends, and to everybody else, happy Tuesday. Sorry, you guys don't get, I don't know, what is your 4th of July equivalent? Anyhow, today's episode, it's been so long since we've made one, and I do apologize, but we've had lots of cool expos. We got another one in August. We dropped the first episode of Unearthed, which is really cool, and, yeah, ranting. But when I was at the expo, I realized something after all of the people I talked to, and I think is really important, is that people in the reptile community know a lot about wild-caught versus captive-bred, but people in the arthropod community know very little about it. So what I want to do today is I'm going to have just the facts, the pros, the cons of both wild-caught and captive-bred. So let's first explain what is wild-caught versus captive-bred. Wild-caught is exactly how it sounds. It was taken directly from the wild and then shipped to wherever you ended up ultimately purchasing it from. It can go to various different sources. So some places are exclusively wild-caught, sell then to pet stores sell you your pet. This is an example of some of those larger chains that you know about. They're not buying captive bred, they're just taking them right out of the wild, and a couple very large vendors in particular, they like to buy from another very large company in particular that is responsible for most of the problems that are actually in the arthropod community. So, wild-caught is exactly as it sounds, like I said. Now, what is captive bred? It means exactly that. It means that somebody took the time to breed them on their own. Now, sometimes you just put them in a box and they do it for you, and then other times, such as tarantulas or mantids, you have to get a little bit more involved. So, with that knowledge in mind, let's just get right into the pros and cons, starting with number one, wild-caught pros. So what's the first pro? You get access to species that you otherwise wouldn't actually have access to. So one particular large company with the initials U and G is notorious for taking a slew, sometimes millions of them, out of the wild, and they sell them directly to your front door with amazing customer service, so you get that warm and fuzzy feeling at the end of the day. The problem with this is that they're completely wild-caught, which we'll talk about in the cons. But yeah, you get access to species that you otherwise wouldn't have access to. Number two, you get cheap animals. I want you to remember the word cheap here, because it's going to come back when we talk about cons. They're very affordable. Not a single vendor alive who does captive bred like myself can possibly ever compete for pricing with people that are selling things exclusively wild-caught. Now, that being said, you have lots of vendors who sell wild-caught creatures for exorbitant prices because they know that you don't know better, and that's fine, but we're going to teach you a little bit later on how you can ask. And last but not least, for breeders, it allows them the attempt to breed new species. So wild-caught, when I purchase wild-caught, is because it just isn't out there. There's no access to it. You know, I had a particular breed of mantis that was not in the hobby. I was able to breed them, and I'm now working with another mantis vendor, whose name you might know about, to actually get these established. So there is the ability, because let's face it, at the end of the day, every pet you've ever had that's an arthropod started as a wild-caught species. So am I saying never take out of the wild? Absolutely not. But unfortunately, this is where our pros of wild-caught end. Now let's talk about the cons. Con number one, this is a big one when it comes to something that barely lives that long anyways. You have no idea how old it is. You could have got it when it's 3 months till it dies. You could have got it when it's got a year till it dies. Do you know? No. Do you have any idea how to tell what instar it is when it's a wild-caught species? Probably not, unless you're an entomologist or you're someone who's so passionate that you constantly are buying these. But if you're that knowledgeable, you probably should also know that you could just breed them yourself and then know the outcome for them. Con number two, wild-caught means all of the nasties that you could possibly bring into your house, you are now bringing into your house. What does that mean? Bad molds. You know what your arthropods don't like? Molds that are targeted towards them, like the one that I mentioned up here in my molds video. You know what else your little box bundle of joys don't have? That great of an immune system for the wild. So that means any other thing that could cling to them, including various mite species or what have you. Another things is pathogens. We forget pathogens exist, but they also exist in the arthropod kingdom. And guess what? That wild-caught species you just brought into your house, well, you put it in a box right next to all of the other creatures. You know what happens when you put a bunch of people or animals together in a box that are artificially controlled? Diseases spread quite abundantly. And you know what your captive bred species are probably not used to. That pathogen that has been bouncing around the wild population. And if you don't believe me, go ahead and look at farm-raised fish and all of the problems that ultimately happen with them, as well as the pathogens when they ultimately get brought out into the rivers or streams. When you have captive bred species, they have to be contained like it's a kid that's never gone outside and has lived his entire life in a bubble. They need to be kept in that bubble because they unfortunately just don't have the ability to fight off things that their bodies are not used to fighting off. So that's con number 2. Number 3, was it a female? I hope you enjoy babies. Lots of babies. Why? She's probably gravid. And when I say probably, I mean, is it an adult? She's definitely gravid. That black widow you have? Guess what? Babies. That centipede you brought in? Babies. Spiders? Babies. So if babies is what you want, you're definitely gonna get them, because that's what happens when you bring something from the wild. Another con? Missing limbs. Sometimes a lot of missing limbs. You will often see blue feigning death beetles missing either the 4 parts of their limbs or the entire leg. Why? Because that's what happens in the wild, guys. Birds attack them, or they're stupid and they run into things and then get their legs caught. They're going to be missing limbs, and yes, captive bred can sometimes miss limbs too, but it happens pretty much all of the time. You will consistently get jumping spiders from certain individuals that are very well known because the internet exists, where they sell these jumping spiders and they tell you they're wild caught, and then you get them and you're shocked when your cute little baby's missing 1 to 2, maybe even 3 legs, because wild is horrible. 3-legged Steve, you remember him before he passed after the longest living spider I've ever seen in my household? Well, he had only 3 legs left, and that's because he was a wild caught species. So just remember that. And last but not least, and this is where I'm really going to bum you out, because remember, guys, I'm not here giving you my opinions on things. I mean, I am. I'm also giving you facts. Deforestation and climate change and housing and all of the other things that we're doing, human beings are not going to stop doing them. And you know what happens when we take things out of the wild? Well, with bug species, typically you have the ability that they can kind of catch back up because they breed so many, right? True, to a point. On a long enough timeline, they don't have the ability to make up. Because if you imagine and then a lot of us who are millennials know this, how many of you have kids that are my age? I'm 37. Not as many of you as if, say, you were 55 or 60 right now, because people do not like to have babies when they're afraid for the world. And if you're a bug and the world is getting hot, you're losing your home, you're constantly being attacked, people are constantly snatching your babies, and on top of it, all of the other crazy things going on between tornadoes, droughts, and all of the other pieces, you're probably not able to have the amount of babies you were previously. And by taking them out of the wild, you just add one more element to all of the shit sandwich that you've ultimately created by taking them out to begin with, or the problems they're currently having. So that's the last of the cons for me, and if 5 of them aren't enough for you, how about we instead start talking about the pros of captive breeding? So let's talk about pros. Pro number 1, the person who you bought them from, if they are the breeder, knows exactly how old they are. To an extent. Like, come on guys, if you ask me how old is this isopod, I have no idea. There's like 30 million of them in that bin. But if you ask me how old my jumping spiders are, I could tell you, or my green lynx spiders, or the tarantulas. All of the things that are sold as individuals, they're going to know exactly how old they are. Or maybe they're off by a month, but they're going to have a pretty good idea. Go ask a wild caught vendor just how old that spider is. They're not going to have any idea. Pro number 2. Remember all those things I just said about pathogens and mold and all of that crap? Guess what you don't have to worry about? Any of that. Because when it's in a box in your house, when you bought a bag of soil from someone that's selling it that's been either frozen before or it's something like Reptisoil, you brought in everything else in a completely sanitized environment, and you added the sanitized creature into it, you don't have to worry about outside pathogens except for the regular spores that are just in the wild, and you can't control that anyways. But that mold is good mold. Have you watched the mold video yet? Because if you didn't, you're going to really want to go watch that, because ultimately it's not going to make any sense when I'm talking about the difference between good mold and bad mold. Now, one other thing that's a pro. You don't have to worry about them being pregnant unless you did that. You dirty bastard, you. But you're the responsible for it. You either put them in a box together and or you partaken had something to do with it. Anyways, you're the reason that they're pregnant. Not because you brought them in out of the wild, but because you actively wanted that to happen. Missing limbs in captive bred? Well, yes, that is possible. Especially in roach species, they'll beat each other up all the time. But you know what? They did it to themselves. Sometimes literally. I've watched beetles get their legs caught, and rather than just walk backwards the way that they could have to escape it, they'll just start flailing like a lunatic and it breaks their legs off. So that does happen. Now, the other piece is your vendor is going to know all of how to take care of these creatures, especially if they're the breeder. Now, sometimes people that are just going to be selling them, like your local pet shop, if they've got breeders that they're buying from, they might not know much, but the breeder themselves is going to have a pretty good intimate knowledge on how exactly to take care of this creature, because it would have died and not bred if they weren't able to understand all of that information. Another piece for this is that the healthier creatures are less scared of you because you're not a bird. Now, they're going to still be afraid, don't get me wrong. Spiders don't ever get used to you. None of these creatures ever get used to you. But they will start walking up to the cage when it's time for feeding. They will not immediately run away the second you pull everything up. For the most part, tarantulas are stupid. That's definitely going to happen no matter what. But you will just identify that the captive bred species are a little less skittish, I guess is the better way to put it. And last but not least, and this is an important one for me, you're supporting a local business. Now, I'm not saying that by doing the wild-caught species that you're not supporting a local business. You are. But you're supporting a local business that actually cares enough to do the captive bred. Now, yes, captive bred, as we will talk about in a second, will be more expensive. But you're supporting a local business that cares enough to do it. It means they're passionate enough to do it. They don't have to. They could do 100% wild caught, and you'd be none the wiser. Cons of captive bred? There's only 3. Number 1, there are less species out, because there's not too many breeders out there that are trying for anything besides dubia roaches and whatever people's story of the month is this week, okay? Not a lot of, and there's, I don't know how many breeders there are that are breeding and also selling on their website like my dumbass, but there isn't many of us at the end of the day. So take that for what it is. But ultimately, you're not going to have every species you ever hoped for, because we can't do everything at one time. It's not conducive. Trust me, I tried breeding about 500 species at one point, and it gets exhausting, because at the end of the day, every single one of those has a completely different methodology in how you got to take care of them. So while I do my best, there aren't a lot of people out there that are going to want to put that kind of time and patience in. And all of us come from different income brackets, right? At the end of the day, if you can't afford it, you can't afford it. And I understand why. Number 2, they're more expensive. You know, vendors, they're not turning and burning product. They're actually breeding these things, which means they have to feed these things, which means there's overhead costs at the end of the day. Captive bred will always be more expensive. Is it exorbitant? No, not at all. But it is going to be more expensive. It's like people that breed tokay geckos versus wild-caught tokay geckos. Are they that much different? Not really. But at the end of the day, don't you feel better knowing that you're going to know exactly how old that species is? You know the vendor that's breeding it knows exactly how you need to take care of it. And you know that you didn't take it from its home in the wild, and it's also not going to be pregnant. And last but not least, there aren't enough people doing this, guys. Like, seriously, you want to make a big difference in the actual arthropod and invertebrate community, what you need to do is you need to start breeding them. Now, you want to know what my personal, honest opinion, without any of the facts, just my thorough opinion on how I feel that we in the hobby should be doing this? Well, let's talk about it. All right, it's time to bandstand a little bit here. If you want to know how we should be doing this, and it frustrates me time and time again to see people that have the potential and the bandwidth to do this, but they don't. It should be importers selling only to breeders. Breeders get that creature off the ground and started. They, at that point, sell to distributors. That's the way it would make the most sense, right? Or the breeders could sell it to themselves. But at this point, here's what you're going to need to do to make it worthwhile. The wild-caught species are going to have to increase in price and not just be bottom dollar, figure out who can sell the cheapest. The breeders are going to have to pay a little bit more, and I know you're panicking already, but Juice, I'm already paying so much. I get it, but listen. You, at this point, need to be able to breed them. If you can't breed them, then don't select that creature. You need to be knowledgeable in what you're doing, because at the end of the day, for this to work properly, everybody that's a part of it needs to be knowledgeable. Yes, there's going to be trial and error, and we're going to fail, and that's fine. At that point, we sell to pet stores. And pet stores, obviously, you need to adjust your expectations because it's not cool for you to expect people to sell something for $5 and then turn around and sell it for $50, all right? And I get it. You're a pet store. That's what your margins are. That's what you're used to. But you understand if you paid a little bit more, you could charge a little bit more. That's how economics work, especially in the United States. So if we want to do this smart, wild-caught importers, let's just say hypothetically, they're buying them from someone in another country for 10 cents a piece. Pay them $1, charge me $15. I'm going to charge the people when I breed them $25, and the pet store can sell them for $50. And that's how economics works, because the freaking McDonald's hamburger's been going up for the last 50 years and no one's noticed. So they're definitely not going to notice when the price is a little bit higher for their pet. And it's going to have one more added bonus. There's going to be a lot less dead pets that nobody's done any research on because they got it for $8 at the local expo. Everybody wins, nobody loses, and you're only going to buy the things that you're actually passionate about buying rather than treating these things like Pokemon that they can't die. They only faint, and you can bring them to your local Poke store. So, sorry for bandstanding. My name is Juice. I hope you enjoyed our episode, and we will be back with a slew of videos here soon. Happy 4th of July, folks.